fight, 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 and we will win, win, win. We're going to win, win, win.
川普2.0时代来临，美国拉高保护主义和提高关税的措施恐怕成为必然。而事实上，20世纪以来，这样的自由贸易和全球化秩序恐怕也将写入另一个篇章。今天很开心可以在新加坡访问到曾经在亚太经济合作会议 APEC 担任政策小组主席，同时也是现任李光耀公共政策学院的资深经济专家 Dr. Hugh 博士，一起和我们分享川普2.0时代对东南亚乃至于整个区域的影响和动态。It's my pleasure to have you here, Dr. Hugh.
Thank you.
Yeah. So my first question is as we mentioned before, in the coming future, goods or service around the world want to entering the U.S. might need to pay a customized tariff rather than in accordance with the WTO framework. It might let the U.S. Income increases, but also possible to push out the inflation. However, if more countries around the world trying to implement a high tariff, how would the consequence for the global economy?
Well, it's going to be very bad for the global economy because if the U.S. Raise tariffs on all the countries, not just China, then you're going to see retaliatory actions from other countries as well. And that's going to have an impact on trade flows and on economic growth. And, it's free trade is all about, movement of goods across different countries. And if tariffs and other types of non-tariff barriers have a impact on those trade flows. So some private economists are already beginning to forecast that if there's going to be a new trade war between US and China and other US trading partners, then global growth is going to be impacted. Some are saying it might slow down by even up to a third of GDP forecast. It's still too early to tell. Worst case scenario, people are looking at those numbers.
To this day, Singapore remains the only ASEAN country have signed a FTA with the US. Like bilateral trade between Singapore and the US has nearly tripled over the past 20 years. What challenge do you think this kind of cooperation will face if Trump trying to enhance this kind of tariff?
You're right. Singapore and the US have got a long economic cooperation. And if you look at the trade numbers, Singapore is the 17th largest trading partner for the US. And for Singapore, the US it's the second largest trading partner, right? So we've seen that increase in trade. And of course, one of the biggest concerns by everyone is that there's a potential trade war between US and China, but also other Southeast Asian countries could be affected too. Not Singapore, because Singapore right now has, if you look at US and Singapore, US has a trade surplus, with Singapore, but it has a trade deficit with Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand. So these are the countries that may face increase in tariffs if Donald Trump is going to carry out many of these trade protectionism actions. But Singapore is not immune either because Singapore is a very small open economy, but it's also a trade and economic hub for Southeast Asia. So if the entire region, Southeast Asia, is affected by this trade war and trade tensions, then economic growth for the entire Southeast Asian region will also be affected and slow down. And that, of course, will have an impact on Singapore. As you know, Singapore is a small economy. Its markets is all over the world, including Southeast Asia.
As we know, the financial and social structure of Southeast Asian countries are much stronger than during the financial crisis in 1997. In the future, if Trump's participation in Southeast Asian economies decrease and certainly the China's influence increase, what must South Asian do to strengthen the so-called economy resilience?
I don't think Southeast Asia is going to have to choose a side between US or China, right? It has its own plans. It's trying to economically integrate all these economies to create an ASEAN economic community. So it's quite an ambitious plan because right now ASEAN combined is already the 5th largest economy in the world, if they're integrated, of course. And by, I heard, 2030 or 2035, it might be the 4th largest, right? The idea of the ASEAN Economic Community is to create a single market and production base, right? So it has a lot of different kinds of economic trade investment agreements to try to create that integrated market. So if they're able to do this in, say 5 to 10 years, then it can be a very attractive alternative production platform vis-a-vis China, right? So, and that's already beginning to happen to some extent, right? We know this the China plus one strategy, and some of the ASEAN countries have benefited from some of the operations, manufacturing operations, moving from China to Vietnam, to Thailand, to Malaysia. But what we want in the future is that they will move more of the operations to many more ASEAN countries, not just a few of them. And for that to happen, they need to be more integrated. What we saw in the pandemic was that there was too much dependence on a sole supplier, and many of that was China, right? Yeah. So with the lockdowns, we see that supply chain disruptions. What multinationals are trying to do is to move a lot more of the operations into other countries, particularly Southeast Asia. But they need to have the right infrastructure. They need to have both hardware, roads, ports, different kinds of hardware infrastructure, but also software, skilled labor, skilled engineers. It's easy for them to move their operations.